"Honey, you mind stepping back? This is a live fire range." The voice, thick with the unearned confidence of a young buck, cut through the shimmering heat waves rising from the Mojave Desert floor. Jessica Stone didn't flinch. She continued her slow, rhythmic work, her gloved hand methodically plucking spent brass casings from the gravel, their metallic glint a stark contrast to the dusty blue of her coveralls. The sun beat down on the back of her neck, warming the long blonde hair she had tied back in a tight, practical ponytail. She straightened up slowly, her bucket of brass held loosely in one hand. Before her, prone in the dirt, were two Marines. The shooter, a sergeant with a jawline that seemed carved from granite and a fresh, high-and-tight haircut, peered through the massive scope of a custom-built rifle. His spotter, a younger corporal, had his own optics trained on a target so distant it was an invisible speck to the naked eye. "I'm aware, Sergeant," Jessica said, her voice calm and even, carrying easily in the dry air. "Range is cold for cleanup." The Sergeant Evans pushed himself up on his elbows, turning to look at her fully for the first time. His eyes did a quick, dismissive scan. The loose-fitting coveralls, the womanly curve of her hip, the stray strands of blonde hair escaping her tie. He saw a contractor, a cleanup crew, nothing more. "We're not cold," he grunted, gesturing with his chin toward the distant impact zone. "We're working a problem, a 4000-meter problem, so unless you're here to offer a miracle, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay behind the firing line." He turned back to his scope, the dismissal absolute. It was a language Jessica understood better than most. It was the institutional dialect of being underestimated, a vernacular she had become fluent in over a decade of service. But this was different. She wasn't in uniform anymore. Here she was just the woman who picked up the brass, a ghost in a blue jumpsuit. For the next hour she worked in silence, moving methodically behind the line of shooters, her bucket filling with the satisfying clatter of spent 7.62 mm and .300 Winchester Magnum casings. But she wasn't just cleaning. She was listening. She was watching. She heard the spotter Davis call the wind. "Got a full value crosswind shifting from 9 o'clock. Looks like 7, maybe 8 miles per hour at our position." She heard Evans curse under his breath. "Mirage is a monster. It looks like the whole damn desert is boiling." Crack. A thunderous roar ripped through the air, a physical pressure wave that vibrated in Jessica's chest. She watched the vapor trail, a faint corkscrewing wisp fighting its way through the thick air. She didn't need the spotter's call to know the result. Her eyes, trained by thousands of hours staring through similar optics, could read the subtle signs. She saw the puff of dust erupt a good 10 meters to the left and 5 meters low of the distant steel plate. "No joy. Impact left and low," Davis called out, frustration lacing his voice. "Come right 2 mils, up 1.5. "I did come right 2 mils, Evans shot back, his voice tight. "The wind's dropping off past the second ridge. It's a dead zone in that valley, and then it's picking back up. It's impossible." Jessica paused in her work, her gaze fixed on the distant hazy mountain range. She could see it too. The way the heat shimmer danced differently in the shallow basin 2 kilometers out. The way the sparse creosote bushes swayed near the firing line, but the distant mesquite trees were stock still. Evans wasn't wrong, he just wasn't right enough. He was reading the wind, but he wasn't reading the land. He was fighting the environment, instead of working with it. Another shot, another crack, another curse. "This is pointless," Evans finally spat, rolling onto his back and scrubbing a hand over his face, leaving a smear of dust and sweat. "We've been at this for 3 hours. The barrel's hot, the ammo's cooking, and I can't get a solid read." He sat up and his eyes landed on Jessica again. She was standing 20 feet away, her bucket full, watching them. Not with pity, but with a quiet analytical focus that he mistook for idle curiosity. "You find this entertaining?" he asked, the edge in his voice sharp as a bayonet. "I find it educational," she replied simply, shifting the weight of the brass bucket. Davis, the spotter, chuckled. "Yeah, what are you learning, ma'am?" "That hitting a target from 2.5 miles away is hard. I'm learning that the Coriolis effect is eating about 30 feet of your elevation at this range," Jessica said, her tone conversational. "And that you're dialing for a consistent wind value, but there are at least 3 distinct wind channels between here and that target. The first one is a crosswind, like you said. But the second, in that dip, is almost a headwind, and the third, coming off the face of that rock formation, is swirling. You're not missing by feet, you're missing by zip codes." The 2 Marines stared at her. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Evans's face went from sun-baked tan to a blotchy, angry red. "And just who the hell are you?" he finally managed to say, getting to his feet. "The ballistics ferry. You wander around a Marine Corps sniper range in a janitor's outfit, collecting our trash and handing out unsolicited advice. He strode toward her, using his height and his uniform to try and intimidate her. It was a tactic that might have worked on a nervous recruit. On Jessica Stone, it had no effect. She stood her ground, her posture relaxed, her eyes unwavering. "I'm the person you hired to clear the range," she said. "Well, you're cleared to get the hell out of here," he snapped. He was close now, close enough for her to see the small silver shooting badge pinned to his uniform. A standard expert rifleman badge, not the coveted scout sniper insignia. He was from a regular infantry unit, temporarily assigned to a long-range course. Good, but not elite. Not yet. His pride was a raw, exposed nerve. He noticed her gaze drop to his chest, then back to his eyes. He puffed his chest out slightly, then his eyes caught something. A thin leather cord disappeared into the collar of her blue coveralls. Reaching out with a reflexive arrogance, he hooked a finger under it and pulled. Out came a single large brass casing, its surface dulled by age and weather, a small hand-drilled hole in its base. It was a .338 Lapua Magnum shell. It looked unremarkable, a piece of battlefield detritus. "What's this?" Evans sneered, his lip curling. "Your good luck charm. You bring a little souvenir to work to remind you of your husband's glory days." The air went still. Jessica's eyes, a pale clear blue like a winter sky, seemed to harden into ice. The desert sun, the shouting, the frustration, it all faded away, replaced by a sudden jarring memory. It wasn't a memory of a range. It was the choking dust of a rooftop in Ramadi, the sun a malevolent eye in a brazen sky. The taste of copper and fear was in her mouth. The weight of the rifle, not a tool for sport but an instrument of life and death, was a familiar comfort against her shoulder. Through the scope, she wasn't looking at a steel plate but at a flicker of movement in a third-story window 1,000 meters away. A window where a man with a Dragunov was preparing to kill the Marines of Easy Company, pinned down in the street below. Her spotter, Corporal Jensen, was whispering coordinates in her ear, his voice a low counterpoint to the thumping of her own heart. The brass casing around her neck felt warm against her skin then, too. It was Jensen's. He'd given it to her after her first confirmed kill, a token from one hunter to another. This memory, this flash of another life, was the significance Evans was mocking. It was a piece of her soul, a tribute to a man who never made it home. She gently took the casing from Evans's fingers, her touch surprisingly firm, and tucked it back inside her coveralls. The memory receded, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. "Something like that," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Her calm only seemed to infuriate him more. This was his range, his rifle, his world. She was an interloper, a woman in a jumpsuit who had the audacity to critique him and then retreat into cryptic silence. He was going to make an example of her. "You think you know so much," he challenged, his voice loud enough now to draw the attention of other Marines down the line. A small crowd was beginning to gather, sensing the kind of drama that breaks the monotony of a long day at the range. "You think you can just walk on here and tell a United States Marine how to shoot?" "I just told you what I saw, Sergeant," Jessica said, her patience wearing thin. No, we're past that," Evans declared, a malicious grin spreading across his face. He gestured grandly to the massive rifle resting on its bipod. "You're the expert. You're the ballistics fairy. Prove it. You hit that 4000-meter plate. One shot, you do it, and I'll personally sweep up every piece of brass on this entire base for a month." He paused, letting the weight of his challenge hang in the air. "You miss, and I'll have your contract pulled and your base access permanently revoked for interfering with a live-fire training exercise. How about that?" The other Marines murmured. This was a classic high-stakes flex, a public humiliation in the making. From the edge of the small crowd, an older Master Sergeant, his face a roadmap of desert deployments, had been watching the scene unfold. He was supervising a different training evolution nearby, but the commotion had drawn him over. He didn't know the woman in the blue coveralls, but he recognized the toxic arrogance of a young NCO on the razor's edge of his own competence. He saw the woman's unshakable calm, a stillness that spoke not of fear but of profound and total control, and then he heard Evans say her name, dripping with condescension. "All right, Jessica Stone, let's see what you've got." The name echoed in the Master Sergeant's mind. Stone, Ghost, the legend they told recruits at the Scout Sniper School at Quantico. The one who still held the high-angle, high-wind record. The one who took a shot in Afghanistan that was still classified but whispered about in hushed, reverent tones. It couldn't be. He looked again, really looked, at the way she stood, her weight perfectly balanced. The way her eyes scanned the terrain, not as scenery, but as a series of data points. He slowly backed away from the crowd, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning fury. He pulled out his phone, his thumb flying across the screen. He found the contact he was looking for, the one person on this entire base who needed to know what was happening. He hit send. The call went to a small, cluttered office in the headquarters building of the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. Master Sergeant Gunny Thorne, a man whose presence was as formidable as the nearby mountains, was reviewing after-action reports when his phone buzzed. He saw the name of the Master Sergeant from the range and answered immediately. "What is it, Mac?" "Gunny." Mac's voice was low and urgent. "You need to get down to KD Range 117 now." "What's going on?" "Some boot-ass sergeant from 3rd Battalion is trying to haze a civilian contractor. He's got half the company watching." Gunny Thorne sighed. It was the kind of headache he dealt with weekly. "And you need me to come play babysitter, Mac? Handle it." "Gunny, you don't understand," Mac insisted, his voice dropping even lower. "He's challenging her to make the 4000-meter shot. The contractor. Her name is Jessica Stone." Silence. On the other end of the line, Gunny Thorne went perfectly still. The pen in his hand stopped moving. He slowly swiveled in his chair to face his computer. His fingers, thick and calloused, moved with surprising speed across the keyboard, pulling up the base contractor database. A picture appeared on the screen. A woman with long blonde hair and clear blue eyes. Beside it, a link to her prior service records. He clicked it, the screen filled with a history that few had ever seen. Sergeant Jessica Ghost Stone, USMC, distinguished marksman, high shooter at every school she'd ever attended. Records she'd set at Quantico, at Camp Lejeune, records that still stood. Below that, a list of combat deployments that made the Gunny's own impressive record look thin. Citations for valor, redacted reports hinting at special operations, and a final simple notation for a shot taken under extreme duress at 2,475 meters. He remembered the story. He had been the one to approve the medal. "I'm on my way," Gunny Thorne said, his voice a low growl. He hung up the phone. "Sergeant Major," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the headquarters. "Get the colonel's driver. We're going for a ride." Back on the firing line, the atmosphere was electric. Sergeant Evans, high on his own bravado, had made his final, irrevocable mistake. "What's the matter, Jessica?" he taunted, seeing her hesitation. "Cat got your tongue? Or just your nerve?" Jessica looked not at him but at the rifle. She looked at the distant, shimmering target. Then she looked at the faces of the young Marines watching her, their expressions ranging from amusement to pity. She had nothing to prove to Evans. But to them, to the idea of what a Marine was, and what a woman in their world could be. Maybe she had something to prove after all. "I'll need a spotter who knows what he's doing," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. She looked directly at Corporal Davis. "Can you call Wind, Corporal? Or do you just echo what he tells you to say?" Davis flushed, but he nodded. "I can call Wind, ma'am." "Good," Jessica said. She walked past the stunned Sergeant Evans and settled herself behind the rifle. She didn't just lie down. She seemed to merge with the earth, her body becoming an extension of the weapon system. Her hands moved with an economy and certainty that was mesmerizing. She checked the rifle's level, adjusted the stock to fit her shoulder perfectly, and put her eye to the scope. It was in that moment, as she was making her final adjustments, dialing in an elevation correction that seemed absurdly large to the onlookers, that the sound of tires screeching on gravel filled the air. 2 black government SUVs, the kind reserved for senior command, roared down the range road, kicking up a rooster tail of dust. They slid to a halt just behind the firing line. The doors flew open. Out stepped Gunny Thorne, his frame seeming to block out the sun. Behind him, the base sergeant major, a woman with silver hair and an expression that could curdle milk, emerged from the other vehicle. The small crowd of Marines snapped to a state of petrified attention. Sergeant Evans's jaw went slack. His smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The 2 most senior enlisted Marines on the entire base were here, for him. Gunny Thorne ignored everyone. His eyes were fixed on the woman prone behind the rifle. He walked past the ramrod-straight Evans as if he were a piece of range furniture, and stopped just behind Jessica. The sergeant major walked directly up to Evans. "What in the God-loving hell do you think you're doing, Sergeant?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a 1,000-pound bomb. Evans could only stammer. "Sergeant Major, we were just a friendly wager." Thorne knelt beside Jessica, his voice low and full of a respect that shocked the onlookers. "Ghost, I'll be damned. Heard you were out. Didn't know you were on this side of the wire." Jessica didn't take her eye from the scope. "Gunny, good to see you," Can't talk now. I'm working a problem. Thorne grinned. He stood up and turned to face the assembled Marines, his gaze sweeping over them before landing with crushing force on Sergeant Evans. A friendly wager, you said? Thorne's voice was no longer quiet. It was a parade ground roar that echoed across the desert. You want to know who you're wagering with? You see this woman? He pointed at Jessica. This is Sergeant Jessica Stone, and I mean Sergeant of Marines, the kind they don't make anymore. He began to pace, his voice a litany of her accomplishments. She graduated top of her class at Paris Island, top of her class at the School of Infantry. When she went to Scout Sniper School, she didn't just pass. She set a new record on the known distance course. A record, I might add, that you and every other shooter here has been trying and failing to beat for the last 5 years. He stopped in front of Evans again, their noses inches apart. While you were in high school, Sergeant, she was in the mountains of Kunar Province, providing overwatch for a pinned-down recon team. She took a shot at 1,800 meters, in a 20-mile-per-hour crosswind, at a 30-degree downward angle, and saved the lives of 4 Marines. The rifle you are so proud of? He pointed at the weapon Jessica was now commanding. She helped the engineers at Quantico design the optics package for it. He turned back to the crowd. You see the brass she's picking up? She's not a janitor. She's a ballistics analyst. She's contracted to be here to collect data from these barrels to improve their performance. She has forgotten more about long-range shooting than any of you will ever know. And you, he jabbed a finger at Evans, had the unmitigated gall to challenge her. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the desert wind. Evans's face was ashen. Gunny Thorne wasn't finished. He looked at Evans, his eyes cold steel. You don't look at the coveralls, Sergeant. You don't look at the ponytail. You look at the Marine. And you failed to see one of the finest marksmen this Corps has ever produced standing right in front of you. You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed my range. And you embarrassed that uniform. Jessica's voice cut through the tension, calm and focused. Corporal Davis, talk to me. Davis, shaking slightly, snapped his attention back to his optics. Wind is holding steady. 6 miles per hour, full value from your 9 o'clock. Negative, Jessica stated, her voice flat. The flag at 500 meters is showing 6. The Mirage at 2,000 is running left to right, which means the wind is pushing 10 out there. But look at the heat rising off the rocks past the basin. It's creating an updraft. Give me a hold for a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind with a 1/4 mil updraft. Then, she turned her head slightly, not to the gunny but to Evans. The standard is the standard, Sergeant. It doesn't ask your name or your gender or what you're wearing. It just asks if you can meet it. That's all that ever matters. She settled back behind the scope. The world narrowed to the small circle of her optic. For a second, the image of the distant steel plate was overlaid with another memory. The full memory of the brass casing she wore. Corporal Jensen was beside her, bleeding from a piece of shrapnel. He was fading, but he was still trying to spot for her. Take the shot, Ghost, he had whispered, his voice thin. For the boys. She had adjusted for wind, for angle, for the spin of the earth itself. She had controlled her breathing, slowed her heart, and squeezed the trigger. The shot had been true. Jensen had died on that rooftop 10 minutes later, but the Marines of Easy Company had gone home. The casing wasn't a souvenir. It was a promise to always meet the standard. She let out a slow, controlled breath, emptying her lungs. The crosshairs settled on a point that to anyone else would have seemed like empty desert air, high and to the left of the target. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a deafening roar. The bullet, a tiny piece of precision engineering, began its long journey. For 4, 5, 6 seconds, there was only the sound of the wind. The Marines held their breath. Then, faint but unmistakable, a sound drifted back across the vast expanse. Ping. Impact. Dead center. A collective gasp went through the crowd of Marines, followed by a spontaneous eruption of cheers and applause. Corporal Davis stared through his spotting scope, his mouth hanging open. Hit, he whispered, his voice full of disbelief and awe. Direct hit. Gunny Thorne just nodded, a small, proud smile on his face. In the weeks that followed, the story of the shot became a new legend at 29 Palms. Sergeant Evans was reassigned to permanent mess duty, a humbling but necessary lesson in humility. The base sergeant major instituted a new mandatory training brief for all incoming units on professional respect, using an anonymized version of the incident as a case study. And Gunny Thorne officially added Sergeant Jessica Stone's biography to the historical curriculum at the sniper school. One afternoon, a month later, Jessica was loading equipment into her truck in the base exchange parking lot. "Ma'am?" She turned. It was Evans. He was in his working uniform, looking tired but clear-eyed. He held his cover in his hands, clutching it respectfully. "Sergeant," she said, her tone neutral. "I just wanted to apologize," he said, struggling to meet her eyes, "for my conduct on the range. There was no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, deeply." Jessica studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. He hesitated. "I also wanted to ask, how did you know about the updraft? I've shot on that range a dozen times. I never saw it." A small smile touched Jessica's lips. "You were looking at the target," she explained. "You have to look at everything else. The birds, the dust, the way the light bends over the terrain. The shot is the last part of the equation. The answer comes from reading the whole problem first." He absorbed that, a flicker of genuine understanding in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am." He paused. "You're a hell of a Marine." "We all are, Sergeant," she replied, closing her truck door. "Just have to remember that." She got in her truck and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot, a young Marine who had learned a lesson far more valuable than anything he could have learned through a rifle scope. The stories of our veterans, especially the quiet heroes who don't seek the spotlight, are the bedrock of our military legacy. Women like Jessica Stone have met and exceeded the highest standards, often in the face of doubt and disrespect. Their valor is a testament to the fact that strength, skill, and courage have no gender. If you were inspired by this story, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Together we can ensure that the legacies of these unassuming heroes are never forgotten.